Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to The Doctor Will See You Now. Again, on our journey through crime fiction and through the authors who would have been appearing at Newcastle Noir 2020. And even though COVID seemed to have its way with the festival, it's certainly not going to have its way with our passion for crime fiction and the way that we can meet here and meet with those fabulous authors. And it gives me tremendous pleasure to introduce an author who, until this festival, I hadn't had a chance to get to know, and that is Fiona Erskine. Welcome, Fiona. Thank you for being with us this evening.
Hi, good evening, everyone.
How are you doing there? All okay?
Good, thank you. Yeah, the sun is shining.
It's wonderful. At least some summer joys that we can hold on to. Now, when I started reading about you, Fiona, to prepare for our gathering, I read that you are an engineer by day and a writer by night. I think that is just an amazing combination. Can I ask you how does that go? Are you still working as an engineer?
So I work full time, and I'm based in Teesside, but I do a lot of travel. So although I've got a full-time job, I do have periods of time when in the past, not recently, I was away from home, and writing was a lovely escape.
Mm-hmm. And so getting into the world of engineering, if I can delve a little bit more into that part of your life, I read that you studied chemical engineering at university. To get into that profession, was it very clear, when you were at school, was it clear that that was the way you were going to go?
Not at all. I mean, my first passion was for languages. I went to school in Scotland, so we did hires. So we were able to do a much broader range of subjects up until the age of 16, 17. So I did Russian and French and Italian and German. So I think you're a linguist as well, Jackie.
I am, yeah. And you say magical words like that.
Yeah.
Eve Smith was on the programme a few weeks ago, and she too is a linguist, and despite everything that is happening regarding language learning, hopefully these things will continue. Okay, but you started off as a linguist.
Really, really, really able to do really broad education. And then I had, both my parents were scientists, so I had some, there was a lot of stuff at home, it made me interesting. But I think it was sort of watching Tomorrow's World. The more grown up among us will remember Tomorrow's World and Top of the Pops, with the two intergenerational TV programs that we used to watch as a family. And then my schoolwork experience was at BP oil refinery in Grangemouth.
Yeah.
And they gave me a bicycle. I mean, I think I was 15, and they gave me a bicycle and they said, go and take some samples from the distillation column. I'm sure they showed me what to do, but in my memory, I was just given the freedom of an oil refinery.
And a bicycle.
And I thought, and a bicycle. I thought, actually, this is what I want to do.
And again, just at this moment in time when Scottish hires have just come out, and people thinking about their future and what might be, and your story, I think it's so magical, because it's like you didn't set out, but a chance opportunity changed your life.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it was sort of focusing on, what do I want to do for a job, rather than what am I interested in. And that's went from there. So I went to university when I was 17. I probably should have waited a year, but I had a whale of a time, and did summer jobs every summer from university. And that absolutely clear to me that I wanted to be an engineer in the chemical industry, and that's what I've been ever since.
Okay, so a defining moment, you become a chemical engineer, and then at some point, that career, it's wonderful. It gives you an amazing opportunities, as you've said, and I've read, you travel frequently with it. And yet there comes another defining moment where you start on this path as a writer. Talk to us about how that came about.
Okay. So I've always read. I've always kept a diary. I've always liked letters, but I never thought about creative writing, I guess. When I was working in India, I visited the site of the Bhopal accident. For those who remember, 1984, there was an enormous release of toxic gases in Bhopal in India from the Union Carbide pesticide plant. And that plant, 35 years on, has not been remediated. It's still there, unchanged, still locked in legal battle as to who's responsible for cleaning that site up. And I was so angry, I was so shocked and so angry that kind of started me, I guess, starting to jot things down, initially sort of non-fiction ideas. And then that winter, I had a skiing accident. And for the first time in my life, I was basically ordered by the surgeon to take 6 weeks off after the operation. And I guess I thought, well, here's an opportunity to actually write some stuff down, and it just all poured out. It's the worst book that's ever been written, and it's still in a drawer, but that's what started me off. And then after a while, after many rejections, I realized that I actually had to go back to scratch and learn how to write. So that's when I went on a writing course. It was called Self-Edit Your Novel with the wonderful Debbie Alper and Emma Darwin.
Where did you do that?
It was online. So it was a 6-week kind of online course. And so that was in 2012, I think. And that was just like a revelation. I knew what was in my head, but I hadn't quite twigged that what I put down on paper wasn't going to put the same pictures in someone else's head. So it was a tough, you've written 150,000 words of kind of passion that's close to your heart, and it's unreadable for anyone else. So it was really getting back to basics of writing, of structure, of character, of plot, of the techniques that you need. And I'm still learning. But the wonderful thing about that course, apart from the tutors were fantastic, but was the other people on the course, because it's very difficult to see what's wrong with your own work.
Yeah, when you're so close and immersed in it. Yeah.
But you can much more easily see what someone else does, and then you can think, I do that too. But it distances a little bit, so it's not quite so personal.
And are you still in contact with people that were on the course?
Yes, we are. Yes, I've lost touch with one or two, but with most of them we're still in contact. And in fact, I have some fantastic beta readers from that group as well.
Wonderful, because again, the whole idea of the process of when a novel, I'm always fascinated by the moment that we as readers get to either swipe or hold a book, but knowing that that the journey to that point and what has happened to make it happen, and the fact that along the way there are people who support authors,
yes.
Where does that support come from, and just those they by accident, why these things happen. Okay, so if you will with me, just come now to this point in time. 2 books now in the series, in the Jack Silver series, The Chemical Detective. Just an amazing protagonist that you've created, and such real adventures. I wish, without wishing to sound cliched, I wish that this kind of story, this kind of novel, had been there, when I was at school, shall we say, because it's so empowering. And I think, again, I think you break a lot of boundaries, but in a very subtle way. I think, it's not big fanfares and shouting about things. You just get down to the action and down to the business. But it's been said, has it not? And I don't know to what extent that you would agree with this, that she's sort of a James Bond in reverse. Did you like that to be said about your character, or would you say otherwise?
It's a really interesting question. Yes, I was chuffed to bits because I've always loved James Bond films. And of course, when you watch them now, you just kind of hold your head in your hands at the kind of, the grotesque sexism and racism and homophobic, you name it, it's there. But they were cracking, I always remember them as cracking yarns. And I guess for me, what I wanted was somebody who used their brain rather than their muscles. So I wanted brain rather than brawn. And Jack loathes guns for complicated reasons from her past. She won't touch a gun, so that she has to find other ways of outwitting the baddies, and that quite often involves other forms of explosions. So yes, but most of all, I wanted her to be capable. I was so bored, I've said this before, but I was so bored of female victims. And also I was so bored of sex always being something that was done to women as part of a crime. And I wanted her to be a sexually confident being in her own right, who has relationships with men, but it doesn't define her. They are, they're part of who she is, but they're not, this is not a love story about finding the perfect man at the end of the book, or the perfect partner at the end of the book. So I guess I just wanted her to be a real woman. I mean, she's flawed, she makes some pretty daft decisions at times, and she has a real weakness for very beautiful younger men. But I wanted her to be a whole person, so I guess she's not as cool as a James Bond. She's not as emotionless. She's a living, thinking, feeling being. And the other thing, the trope that drives me bananas is when you have female scientists who are kind of borderline autistic. It's like, in order to be good at maths, you have to be a robot, which of course is not true. And so I really wanted to get away from that as well. I just wanted a whole person who happened to find herself in some sticky situations, but used her grey matter to get out of them.
Yeah, honestly, I think what you've just said are the aspects, as well as the adventures, but the fact that she is who she is, and it's a character that you so easily, you really root for this woman, and well, in no way is she perfect, but I think what drives her, that's the thing, her integrity, her wanting to sort things. I think that was one of the things for me that was like, oh yeah. And so then the first book, and then realizing that there was a second, that the adventures weren't over. And I think that's what I'm loving. And I am hoping there's a third, but we'll come back to that. We shouldn't rush. Yeah. So your first novel then, The Chemical Detective, and it was shortlisted. So thank you.
Sorry. Comes back to front.
It's wonderful. Yeah. So it was shortlisted for Specsaver's debut crime novel this year, which is wonderful. And you're published by Point Blank. Yeah. And I wonder, before we go back further into the novels, how did you find Point Blank, or how did they find you?
So after many, many years writing, discarding, doing courses, learning, I finally got an agent. So I'd set myself, I reckoned that I would have to query 100 people. And I think I was just coming close to 40 or 50 when, just by amazing luck, I got a note from Juliet Mushins to say that she would be interested to read the full manuscript. And it was just at the time when I'd been given a straight to print offer from an online publisher, and I was considering it. So I wrote back to Juliet, this is how arrogant I was, just saying, well, I have got other interests, but I can give you a couple of weeks. And she came back in a couple of weeks and said, yay, let's talk.
Excellent.
So Juliet is a fantastic agent. So I guess the audience are aware of in the UK at least, it's normal. Many people go through literary agents to find publishers. Obviously, there are some direct publishers, and there's a fantastic, vibrant self-publishing part as well to crime writing. But Juliet did a lot of work on the book. It was too long. There were some pieces which she said would make it less appealing to a publisher. And then out of that came a deal with Point Blank, a 2-book deal with Point Blank and with W.F. House for audio. So yeah, that was incredibly exciting. And then what I hadn't realized, having done a lot of editing work with Julia, I think she said a few nips and tucks needed, take out 10,000 words. And I was thinking, 10,000 words? How am I going to do that? But then when I started working with Jenny Parrott, my editor at Point Blank, she then said, okay, I want a bit more here and a bit more here and a bit more here. So there was quite a lot more editing to do.
But what I love about what you say is the fact that you have found people that you trust with that process, because it is nerve-wracking. I was talking to a friend yesterday, the idea of needing to lose words, and how, ouch, all that creation, where is it going to go? But in the end, the process of finding the best book possible, or the best iteration of a story is possible.
Yes. And it's a lovely problem to have. I mean, there are so many good writers who haven't yet found that in a partnership of agent or publisher. It's just wonderful having someone else read your words. And actually, even though they're critical, it's just so great to have someone read and understand what you're trying to do, that, you put up with anything. And as I say, Jenny's a fantastic person to work with. She's completely wild, but she absolutely gets. In fact, the first thing she said to me, she said, "Don't touch it. Leave it alone. Don't even look at it for 2 months. And here's a list of books I want you to read." And that was lovely. That was liberating, just to go away and read lots. And it was people like Tin Roof Blowdown, and his name's just escaped me, but the sort of a whole lot of American writers and British crime writers and Emily Klein, The Girls, there's just a huge range of books. And that was really nice, because when I came back to do the editing, I'd had a proper break. My head had kind of left the manuscript, and I could come back to it with a clean.
To be given that permission, as it were, to be able to spend time immersed. And make that difference. Now, let's return then to the novels. And in the first novel, because I wonder, how closely is Jack Silver based on you? Because she has a skiing accident, does she not?
Well, she's terribly good at skiing, which I'm not. So my skiing accident, it sounds really impressive, like I'm, some kind of action hero, but it was my first ever skiing holiday on the first day on a slope that was about like that with an instructor. And basically it was a very slow fall. My skis didn't disengage, and I twisted my knee and ruptured ligaments. So I am an appalling skier, and I've discovered it's much, much easier to write about skiing than it is to do it. So I'm quite happy with that.
Yeah.
So no, I don't. I think there are obviously, I've drawn on my experience, but she's a very different animal. She's maybe an alter ego. She does all the things that I don't do.
Yeah. So almost like a sense of adventure for self, but safely on a page. You don't have to. Yes. You don't have to go through those things. Very clearly throughout your writing, your chemical knowledge, your professional experience is very clear on the page. And I wanted to ask, how did you manage it, that finding the balance? Because the technical detail is beautiful, but for many of us who are not of, that world, or whose interests lie elsewhere, I wanted to know your process in ensuring that you didn't lose us with too much technical detail. How did you strike the balance?
Well, I'm so glad to hear you say that, because it is a difficult balance. I mean, it's what I really enjoy writing about, because I think it's so beautiful and amazing, and I think there's so much that goes on around us that, we should know more about. I guess, and I have, I've always enjoyed maybe draw back a bit. When I was at university, most of my friends were studying literature or history or languages or something different. And the conversations in the evening, I always felt that that they sort of switched off. When I not in a nasty way and deliberately, but it was difficult to talk about an experiment I'd been doing that day in the lab when they were discussing a book that they were reading. It just didn't. You didn't have. I didn't have the right language. Put it that way.
Yeah.
And then a very, very good friend, Carla, gave me the periodic table by Primo Levi to read. And there's a wonderful story in there about an Italian resin manufacturer and the use of a piece of onion skin to determine the temperature, which has gradually become part of the recipe. No one can remember why you put an onion into this boiling vat of oil. And it no longer has a reason for being there because now there's temperature control. But it was in the very beginning a way of measuring the temperature. And it was such a great story, and it was told so simply, and it just matched exactly my experience, that I guess that started my interest in trying to write things down in a way that would be accessible and interesting to non-technical people. And of course, it's always the human stories. If you take away the human story too much from the technical, then it can become dull. So yes, I'm really pleased you think that. I mean, I did, it was always going to be a tricky sell to put that much science and technology in. But, I've read wonderful crime books where you have every detail of an autopsy or a forensic lab. And I thought, well, you know what, if it's written okay, people can gloss over it if they want to, but some people actually enjoy that. And there's a lot of male thrillers, I mean, Patterson and others, where you have a huge amount of kind of details about ballistics and those things don't interest me. But I think if you care about them, it's great fun to try and find a way. I love analogies. I love trying to kind of weave in a kind of another story which sort of parallels the what I'm talking about.
But just to come back and say, I totally agree with you, and I think it is an amazing skill because it's not just solving the problems here. It's not just looking at this multinational chemical company and what are they doing, but you teach us so much more through that thriller that thriller genre, and thank you for that.
Thank you.
So just to come to that notion of, here we've got Jack Silver then, the individual standing up against the big corporation. And I wanted to ask if it ever, and again, not wishing to get you into any trouble professionally, but have you ever felt, I don't know, inspired to actually do something like that? Have you seen a situation where you've thought, I wish I could step in?
Definitely, and I think that's where the Bhopal experience really shook me. I mean, I have worked for good and responsible companies where if you see that something is wrong, you can generally do something about it. I mean, it's often complicated. It's often not black and white, but only once in my life have I left a company because I didn't feel that my culture and values aligned with theirs, and that was a particular boss, a particular group. And you try and change things, and you get to the point where you realize you're not making any headway, and that's the time to go. So I think having the freedom to leave a job is unbelievably important. And it means that you can push much harder because in the end you're willing to walk away. So yes, absolutely. And I guess I also wanted to kind of, this is not a particular popular view of the world, but I also wanted to kind of just explain how complicated it is and how dependent we are in all these supply chains. I mean, the terrible explosion in Beirut a couple of days ago with the ammonium nitrate fertilizer, which was seized from a stricken ship, and the stored energy in any form, whether it's water behind the wall of a dam or whether it's ammonium nitrate fertilizer, it just has to be treated with enormous respect. And, you know, when things go wrong and people shove problems to one side and don't want to resolve them, that's when you get these horrendous disasters and loss of life. And I think sometimes people are scared of chemicals, and I guess I wanted to demystify it a little bit, because actually they are essential to how we live and eat and breathe fresh, you know, clean air, and drink clean water, and eat safe food. And, you know, I'm not going to win any popularity contests for that, but, you know, I feel it very strongly that the more we understand what a complicated world we live in, the less we'll come up with kind of simple black and white solutions to problems like global warming, which is tremendously intractable and complicated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, I'll just come back to say thank you, you know, for bringing those ideas, for bringing those, you know, those problems to us in a way that maybe we can digest and manage it much better than you know, than just being, you know, lectured to, or, you know, in a dry article. You know, it reaches us, and that is great. So book 2, can you show us book 2?
I certainly can.
Beautiful.
Backwards. Sorry.
Yeah, it's great. It's lovely.
And my beautiful bookmark.
The explosion.
I'll show you.
Wow. So from Slovenia, in this book, you take your character, do you not, to China?
Yes.
And again, I wanted to ask you, I know at the moment it's not possible, but where you take your character, are they places that you have been and worked in beforehand?
Yes, by and large, yes. So in this book, Jack takes a rather risky contract because she needs some money fast. And she goes from the very westernized east coast of China around Shanghai, but finds herself having to go into the industrial interior, into the heartland. So I've been working on projects in China since about 1989. So I've got a long history, and I've seen China change just at an extraordinary pace. Parts of it are completely unrecognizable from just a few years ago. And I guess for Jack, who has very good language skills, she is completely flummoxed by Chinese, as am I. And I'm ashamed of it, because, you know, I've been working closely with a Chinese company now for 6 years, and my Chinese is limited to sort of hello, thank you, and beer.
3 very important words.
Very important
phrases.
Words.
Yeah.
So yes, and again, just as in the Chemical Detective, the kind of the core of it is the Chernobyl accident in 1986. In this book, my interest started with the 1975 Banqiao dam disaster, which certainly killed 250,000 people, probably killed millions from the starvation and disease that followed. But this was basically a dam which burst and just flooded, swept away an enormous population in the grain belt of China. And nobody knows about it in China. And, you know, it's very little known outside of China.
Outside, yes, yeah.
So I went to visit it, and it's the most beautiful, sleepy, idyllic kind of, you know, a reservoir with a kind of big wall at the end of it. And you think, how could something so benign cause so much damage? But again, it's the stored energy. We don't realize really sometimes what's around us.
Yeah. And in visiting that area and in doing the research for an incident that very little, you know, is out there, shall we say, did you come across any difficulties, impediments in, you know, in?
No, not really. I mean, I have a fantastic group of colleagues in China who thought I was a bit mad wanting to go to visit a dam. They told me it'd be really dull, but they were really interested actually as well. So no, I haven't had no difficulties at all. I mean, I think it would be difficult for people inside China to talk about it, you know, openly. Although it's interesting, what is taboo and what is not is constantly surprising and constantly changing as well.
Yes, yeah.
but no, by and large, I mean, there is little, most of the reports I found were written by people outside China. So it was, but we did meet someone who was a child at the time of the accident when we went to visit. It was the boatman who took us out, and that was interesting talking to him about his parents. He was too young really to remember, but his parents certainly had strong recollections, and then people were quite open to discuss. But I would never use their names. I would
of
never
course,
into.
Yeah, because as you say, things change quite quickly, and if it's out there in the public domain, who knows? As well as Jack, and you've spoken to us about her. I wonder, could you talk to us a little bit about her nemesis, Frank Good?
I had fully intended to kill him at the end of The Chemical Detective, but I was having so much fun torturing him, I thought I'd bring him back. So, I mean, he is, I guess, he is the most fun to write, and he is a kind of what's the word, a portmanteau of all the kind of worst traits of, I mean, by and large I've worked with lovely people, but there are always one or two absolute bastards that stick in your mind, and so he's a bit of an amalgam of a couple of those. And he seems a bit larger than life, but actually the people I have in mind were worse. So
do you think people might recognize themselves?
No. The terrible thing about corporate psychopaths, and the people I have in mind were corporate psychopaths, is that they can't see themselves except in a good light. They are so self delusional. But I'm sure one of the people I have in mind would pick the book up and have no idea that he had inspired it. So
yeah. And if I can ask, so going on, we have 2 books here. You had a 2-book contract. Will there be more from Jack?
Well, I can't say too much right at the moment.
But that's always a good thing. I like it. Not allowed to say too much, which means there's things to be said. So okay, yeah.
But I always had a quartet in mind. So I started off with Brazil, Russia, India, and China, because those were the kind of the real the countries of interest, the countries with really fast developing economies, and countries all of which I've worked in. So although the Chernobyl bit is really strictly speaking Ukraine rather than Russia, I've covered Russia and China, so we've got Brazil and India to come.
Wonderful. Now, I have a question, and I hope it's not too risque. But of course, you take us to China in the second novel. But there's also there's fraudulent art auctions involved. But you also have here a troupe of male strippers in Shanghai. Now, Fiona,
and they are gorgeous.
But if the whole thing is right, what you know, did you have the experience in Shanghai of said troupe?
Not in Shanghai, but in Los Angeles. But just to wind back, James Bond can have any number of sexy lampshades in his book. He can have decorative, beautiful women who fall in and out of bed with him. So the only aspect of James Bond that I did want to carry through, no guns, no cold-blooded killer, but was the equivalent of Bond girls, so silver boys, if you like. When my husband and I were on holiday in Los Angeles visiting my son who lives there now, we were staying in a hotel, and a very attractive young man came and sat next to us and got chatting. And it turned out that he was an ex-Marine, an ex-Navy SEAL, who was in Los Angeles because he was the lead dancer in a strip show. And we just got chatting to him, and he was just fascinating. He was just one of those, he was the age of my children, so there was no funny stuff there. But he was just he was so open about what he did, and he basically said, and I've used the line, I love the girls and the dancing, but I do it for the money. And he had a full-time job as a Taekwondo instructor, sort of separately. But he was just so in tune with himself. He was a beautiful man. He made money from these kind of raunchy shows. He did invite us to go, but we were going to bed at sort of 9 o'clock, and I think the show started at 11, so we passed on.
Yeah. too late for that kind of thing. Yeah. But I love how you transport that to Shanghai, though. I think that again.
Well, that was the other thing that amused me is in China there used to be up until quite recently, it was quite common to hire strippers for funerals, because female strippers, because what was important at a funeral was a big turnout. So in order to get people, in the countryside from local villages, there would be entertainment. Horrific. Anyway, the government clamped down on that, but they didn't think to specify the sex, so they clamped specifically on female nudity. They didn't make any such ban on male nudity, and there was one restaurant in Shanghai which launched with, I think they were called gladiators. They hired a whole bunch of Russian men to take off their shirts and just walk around in kind of a little tabard, delivering salad for this Spartans. That's what they were.
Yeah. For
this, and I remember seeing the pictures of that, and of course the pictures were even better because the Chinese police realised that this was an appalling affront to public decency, and so there's pictures of fully clothed Chinese policemen wrestling these naked Russians to the ground in order to arrest them, which did great things for the publicity of the restaurant. So it that little wrinkle just sort of thought, hey, I can have some fun here.
Indeed. Did you know, and Fiona, I'm sorry that we're going to have to draw our consultation to a close because I'm loving this, but what I realized, from talking with you is the way that you always have an eye ready to capture an incident, a conversation, and weave it into your books. Would you do us the honours of holding both those books up again?
I will do. And if there's time, Jackie, I just wanted to mention.
Beautiful, thank you. Yeah.
I just wanted to quickly mention my new project with Sandstone Press, which is completely different, which is a semi-autobiographical account of my very first job as an engineer. And that's coming out in 2021, and that's called Phosphate Rocks, A Death in 10 Objects. Ooh. And it's a complete departure. Doesn't mean that Jack Silver isn't coming back.
Yeah.
But it's again, it's very heavy on the chemistry, but it's another story very close to my heart, which I'm very excited about.
So Phosphate Rocks, yeah? Phosphate Rocks.
Yes.
Yeah, and by the fabulous people at Sandstone. So that look forward to that, really. Fiona, thank you so much for taking time out to be with us and just to indulge in some wonderful conversation about how you got to this point and what it is you're doing. All the very best, and hopefully again in 2021 we can have the festival and you will be there, talking to us about how things have moved on.
I'm looking forward to it.
And other projects as well.
And I'm so sorry that it had to be cancelled. Obviously the right thing to do, but thank you so much for keeping it going. It's
a total pleasure, because it's in our crime fiction, and the community that we all are, that I think, it can keep us going. So I hope to see you very soon.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah. Thank you, Fiona. Bye.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.